Good morning, everyone. I want to start by asking you to pause and think about a moment in your life when you felt a deep connection with someone, only to have that connection suddenly severed. Maybe it was through silence, a boundary drawn, or a decision made. Whatever it was, it left you in a space of uncertainty, wondering what the other person was thinking, feeling, or experiencing. Today, we're diving into the untold stories of what a man might go through during no contact. It's a vulnerable journey layered with emotions, questions, and growth, or sometimes stagnation. And here's the thing about vulnerability, it's the birthplace of both discomfort and transformation. When a man is faced with no contact, he enters a realm of unspoken struggles and silent battles. It's a space where pride wrestles with pain, where ego grapples with reflection, and where love or loss challenges him to grow or resist growth. Let's break this down into 4 key stages that many men experience during no contact. Each stage comes with its own emotional terrain. And as we explore them, I encourage you to reflect not just on what he might be feeling, but on what these moments teach us about the human need for connection. When no contact begins, the initial reaction for a man can feel like being caught in the middle of an unexpected storm. Whether it's a breakup, a conflict, or an intentional boundary being set, the abruptness of silence can be jarring. It's the moment when the familiar rhythm of communication, the calls, texts, or even just the comfort of knowing someone is there is suddenly gone. This disruption can bring about a flood of emotions, often all at once. For some, the first response might be panic. Questions race through his mind like a whirlwind. What just happened? Is this real? Why did she stop reaching out? There's an immediate need to make sense of the situation, but without communication, those answers aren't available. This lack of clarity often fuels the storm, making it difficult to calm the mind. Others might initially feel relief, especially if the relationship was filled with tension or unresolved conflict. The silence can seem like a reprieve, a chance to breathe, but relief doesn't always last. When the noise of the arguments or the friction fades, the absence of connection begins to sink in. Relief can quickly give way to the uncomfortable realization that something significant has changed. The disruption also brings a sense of loss, even if it's not immediately recognized. Human beings are wired for connection, and when that connection is severed, it creates a void. For men, who are often conditioned to suppress vulnerability, this void can be especially unsettling. They may not have the tools or language to process the depth of what they're feeling. So instead of acknowledging the pain, they might bury it under distractions, work, hobbies, or even unhealthy coping mechanisms like overindulgence or avoidance. Then there's the battle with ego. The initial disruption often triggers questions of pride and self-worth. Did she really just walk away? Was I not good enough? Or conversely, why should I care? I'm fine on my own. These thoughts aren't always honest reflections of how he feels, but rather a defense mechanism against the vulnerability that no contact brings. The ego tries to protect him, to shield him from the discomfort of rejection or loss. For some, this stage can also involve denial. He might convince himself it's temporary, that she'll reach out first, or that this is just a game. Denial can offer temporary comfort, but it delays the inevitable reckoning with reality. The most significant part of the initial disruption is the sheer disorientation. It's as if the ground beneath him has shifted, leaving him unsure of where he stands. A relationship or even just the connection was a part of his life's foundation, and now, without it, there's a sudden lack of stability. This disorientation can be overwhelming, leading to a cascade of emotions like confusion, anger, sadness, and sometimes desperation. Yet, within the chaos of this stage lies an opportunity. The disruption is painful, but it's also a wake-up call. It forces him to stop, to confront what he's feeling, and to begin the process of understanding himself and his role in the relationship dynamic. Whether he chooses to face this discomfort or avoid it will determine how he moves forward. The initial disruption is more than just a moment of silence. It's the first step in a journey that can lead to profound self-awareness and growth. It's messy, uncomfortable, and often unpredictable, But it's also where the seeds of transformation are planted. As the days stretch on, what begins as silence transforms into something much deeper, an echo. This phase is characterized by the realization that the absence of contact is not just temporary, but something more profound. The silence, once perceived as a pause, begins to feel like a presence of its own. It becomes a mirror reflecting back thoughts, memories, and emotions that were previously buried under the noise of daily life or the dynamics of the relationship. For a man, the echo of silence can be unsettling. It's a time when the mind becomes its loudest, filling the void with what ifs, why nots, and what now. This stage is where the absence of communication begins to weigh heavily, creating a sense of loneliness and isolation. He starts to miss the little things, the good morning texts, the inside jokes, the sound of her voice. Even the conflicts that once seemed overwhelming might now feel like something he'd gladly face if it meant reconnecting. The silence also leaves space for introspection, but not all men are comfortable navigating this emotional terrain. Society often teaches men to suppress vulnerability, to equate silence with strength. But in this phase, silence isn't strength, it's a challenge. It forces him to confront feelings he might have avoided in the past. Loneliness creeps in, and with it comes the vulnerability he's been conditioned to hide. Nostalgia plays a significant role during this time. The mind tends to romanticize the past, amplifying the good moments while conveniently muting the bad ones. He might replay happy memories, a shared laugh, a meaningful conversation, a moment of intimacy. These memories, though sweet, can also feel like salt in the wound, intensifying the longing for what once was. At the same time, silence can magnify insecurities. In the absence of answers, the mind often fills the gaps with worst-case scenarios. He might wonder if she's happier without him, if she's moved on, or if he's truly as replaceable as his fears suggest. These thoughts can spiral, creating a sense of inadequacy and self-doubt. Interestingly, the echo of silence also reveals the dynamics of attachment. For a man who struggles with emotional avoidance, this phase might feel unbearable because it forces him to feel what he's been trying to escape. For someone who tends toward anxiety in relationships, the silence might trigger a desperate need for reassurance. Either way, it's a test of emotional resilience and self-awareness. This phase can also be a crossroads for ego and vulnerability. On one hand, he might feel the urge to reach out to break the silence, to get some form of closure or validation. On the other hand, his ego might hold him back, whispering, "Don't show weakness. Don't let her know you miss her." This internal conflict can create a paralysis where he wants to act but fears the consequences of doing so. For some men, the silence becomes a catalyst for distraction. They throw themselves into work, hobbies, or social activities trying to drown out the echoes. While this can provide temporary relief, it often postpones the emotional processing that the silence demands. Others might turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms, overindulging in alcohol, binge watching shows, or seeking validation through fleeting connections. These distractions, however, rarely address the root of what they're feeling. But the echo of silence is not only about loss, it's also an opportunity. In the stillness, there's a chance to sit with emotions, to understand them rather than run from them. It's a space where he can begin to separate his sense of self from the relationship. The silence allows him to ask deeper questions. Who am I without her? What do I truly want? What did I learn from this experience? However, reaching this point requires courage. It's easier to avoid the discomfort, to bury the feelings under layers of distractions or pride. But for those willing to face the echo, the silence becomes a teacher. It teaches patience, self-awareness, and the importance of healthy communication. In the echo of silence, a man is not only confronted with the absence of the other person, but also with himself. It's a vulnerable, raw, and often painful phase, but it's also where the most significant growth begins. Because in that echo, he starts to hear not just the void left by the other person, but also his own voice, his own needs, and his own truth. And that's where transformation begins, by listening to what the silence has to say. As the silence stretches further, something profound begins to happen. A man starts looking inward. The mirror of self-reflection phase is both a challenge and a gift. It's the stage where the absence of external communication forces him to confront the internal dialogue he's been avoiding. There's no distraction, no one to blame, and no one to validate him. The only thing left is his own reflection. For many men, this stage can feel deeply uncomfortable. Society often encourages men to project confidence, suppress vulnerability, and avoid introspection. But during no contact, there's no escaping the mirror. It stands there unyielding, showing him not only his best qualities, but also his flaws, blind spots, and unhealed wounds. Confronting emotions. This phase begins with the surfacing of emotions he may not have even realized were there. Regret, guilt, and sadness often take center stage. He might start replaying key moments from the relationship, examining his actions and words with a new lens. Questions arise. Did I handle that situation the right way? Was I present enough, kind enough, or understanding enough? What could I have done differently? These questions, though painful, are the foundation of growth. They force him to take accountability for his role in the dynamic and acknowledge where he might have fallen short. This is an important step because true self-reflection is not about self-criticism or wallowing in guilt. It's about learning and evolving. As he delves deeper, he might begin to notice patterns. Perhaps he has a tendency to withdraw during conflict, or maybe he struggles with expressing his emotions. He might realize he has been repeating the same behaviors across different relationships, leading to similar outcomes. Recognizing these patterns can be both enlightening and humbling. It's like peeling back layers to uncover truths that were hidden beneath the surface. For some men, this is the first time they truly face these patterns head on. It can feel overwhelming, but it's also empowering. Awareness is the first step toward breaking unhealthy cycles and creating healthier dynamics in the future. The mirror of self-reflection also exposes the battle between ego and vulnerability. The ego resists self-reflection because it feels like admitting weakness. It whispers things like, "This isn't your fault," or "You were fine just the way you were." Vulnerability, on the other hand, invites him to lean into discomfort, to admit that maybe he wasn't perfect, and to see this as an opportunity to grow. This internal tug of war is crucial. Choosing vulnerability over ego opens the door to authentic change. It allows him to own his mistakes without letting them define him, and to embrace the discomfort as a necessary part of becoming a better version of himself. Understanding the role of emotions. During this phase, he may also come to terms with emotions he previously dismissed or suppressed. For instance, he might recognize that anger during the relationship was actually a mask for fear or sadness. He might realize that detachment was his way of protecting himself from getting hurt. These realizations deepen his understanding of himself and provide insight into how he approaches relationships. This emotional reckoning can be transformative. It's a reminder that emotions, even the difficult ones, are not enemies, they're guides. They point to unresolved issues, unmet needs, and areas of growth. Self-compassion and forgiveness. Self-reflection can easily spiral into self-criticism if not approached with compassion. A man might initially be hard on himself, replaying every mistake and wondering why he didn't do better. But part of the reflection process is learning to forgive himself. He begins to understand that he's human, imperfect, and capable of learning from his experiences. Forgiving himself doesn't mean excusing his behavior. It means acknowledging his humanity and committing to growth. This self-compassion is vital because it creates the foundation for healthier relationships, not just with others, but with himself. To defining what matters. As he continues to reflect, he begins to ask deeper questions about what truly matters to him. What do I want in a partner? What kind of person do I want to be in a relationship? What am I willing to work on? These questions help him gain clarity about his values, priorities, and goals. He might also reflect on what he learned from the relationship, both the good and the bad. Every relationship, even those that end, offers lessons. Maybe he learned about the importance of communication, the need for mutual respect, or the value of shared goals. These insights become part of his emotional toolkit, equipping him for future connections. A catalyst for change. The mirror of self-reflection is ultimately a catalyst for change. It's the stage where a man transitions from passively experiencing no contact to actively engaging with its lessons. It's where he starts to shift from regret to resolve, from blame to accountability, and from loss to growth. For some, this phase leads to personal transformation. He might seek therapy, read self-help books, or take steps to improve his emotional intelligence. He might begin practicing healthier communication, setting boundaries, or addressing unresolved trauma. These changes aren't just about winning someone back, they're about becoming the kind of person he wants to be. The power of facing the mirror. The mirror of self-reflection is not easy. It requires courage to face uncomfortable truths, humility to acknowledge mistakes, and strength to commit to growth. But it's also a deeply rewarding phase. It's where the pain of no contact begins to alchemize into wisdom, and where the silence transforms into a space for healing and renewal. In facing the mirror, a man not only learns about himself, he also begins to rewrite his story. And in doing so, he steps closer to the person he was always meant to be. The Crossroads of Action is a pivotal phase in the journey through no contact. It's the moment when a man must decide how to move forward after weeks or months of silence and introspection. By this point, the initial shock has passed. The echoes of silence have quieted to a murmur, and the reflections in the mirror have begun to take shape. But now comes the challenge: what does he do with everything he has experienced and learned? The crossroads is not just about choosing a path, it's about confronting fears, desires, and the unknown. It's where all the emotional processing and self-reflection culminate in a tangible decision, and it's often accompanied by a mix of anxiety, hope, and uncertainty. The paths before him. At this juncture, there are generally two main paths. Reaching out. This is the choice to break the silence, to reconnect, and to see if there's still a chance to rebuild the relationship. It's a path filled with vulnerability, as reaching out requires risking rejection. He may wrestle with questions like, what if she doesn't respond? What if she's moved on? How do I express myself in a way that feels authentic without overwhelming her? For many men, the fear of rejection can feel paralyzing. But if the relationship was meaningful and the introspection has revealed a genuine desire to repair things, this path might feel worth the risk. Moving on. The other path is to accept the silence as final and choose to move forward without reaching back. This is not a passive choice. It requires active engagement with the process of letting go. Moving on means redefining his life without her in it and finding closure within himself rather than through an external resolution. Both paths require courage. Reaching out demands the bravery to face the unknown, while moving on demands the strength to leave behind something once cherished. The internal struggles at the crossroads. Reaching the crossroads is not a simple, clear-cut moment. It's filled with internal conflict, and the choice isn't always obvious. Fear vs. hope. On one hand, there's fear of rejection, fear of making the wrong choice, and fear of the unknown. On the other hand, there's the hope that reconnecting might lead to reconciliation, or that moving on might open the door to something new. Balancing these emotions can feel like a roller coaster. Ego vs. vulnerability. The ego often rears its head at this stage, urging him to protect himself. Don't reach out. Don't show weakness. You're better off without her. But vulnerability whispers a different truth. What if this is worth fighting for? What if the silence ends with a meaningful conversation? Choosing vulnerability over ego is a transformative act, but it's not an easy one. Logic vs. emotion. This phase also brings a tug of war between logic and emotion. Logic might say, she hasn't reached out, so why should you? Or it's time to move on. Meanwhile, emotion tugs at his heartstrings with memories and feelings of longing. Striking a balance between the two is key to making a decision he can live with, if he chooses to reach out. For a man who decides to reach out, the challenge lies in how to do so authentically. This isn't about sending a casual, hey, how are you message. It's about crafting communication that reflects his growth and intentions. Timing matters. Reaching out too soon can feel impulsive, while waiting too long might make the connection feel irreparable. Finding the right moment is crucial. Being honest, authenticity is key. Instead of games or manipulation, he needs to express himself with clarity and respect. For example, I've taken this time to reflect, and I realize there are things I want to share with you. I value what we had, and I'd like to talk if you're open to it. Accepting the outcome. Reaching out is always a risk. She might respond positively, or she might choose not to engage. He must prepare himself for both possibilities and accept her decision without resentment, if he chooses to move on. For a man who decides to move on, the process is just as courageous and requires its own set of actions. Finding closure within closure doesn't always come from a conversation or resolution with the other person. Sometimes it comes from accepting that the relationship served its purpose, taught its lessons, and is now a part of his past. Redefining himself moving on is an opportunity to rediscover who he is outside the relationship. This might involve exploring new hobbies, focusing on personal goals, or deepening relationships with friends and family. Healing and growth, letting go, isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning from it. He can take the insights from his reflection phase and use them to grow emotionally and relationally. The power of choice. What makes the Crossroads so transformative is that it places the power of choice back into his hands. No contact often begins as something that feels out of his control, whether it was initiated by the other person or as a mutual decision. But at the Crossroads, he regains agency. This decision isn't just about the relationship, it's about who he wants to be moving forward. Whether he reaches out or moves on, the key is to make a choice that aligns with his values, growth, and emotional well-being. Embracing the outcome. Regardless of the path he chooses, the Crossroads marks a turning point. It's where he stops being stuck in limbo and starts taking action toward a new chapter. Both paths come with challenges, but they also come with opportunities to rebuild, redefine, and rediscover. The Crossroads of Action is a reminder that no contact isn't just about what happens between two people, it's about what happens within oneself. It's about finding the courage to make a decision, even when the outcome is uncertain. Because in the end, it's the choices we make in moments of discomfort that define who we are and who we're becoming. As we stand at the culmination of this journey through no contact, it's clear that the experience is far more than the absence of communication. It's a deeply transformative process. From the disruption of familiar rhythms to the haunting echo of silence, from the raw honesty of self-reflection to the courageous decision at the crossroads, every step is an invitation to grow, to learn, and to heal. This is not just about navigating the void left by someone else. It's about discovering the strength within ourselves to sit with discomfort, to embrace vulnerability, and to choose a path that aligns with our truest selves. Whether the journey leads to reconciliation or renewal, the most important outcome is not about what is lost or gained externally. It's about the person you become in the process. So as we close, I leave you with this: no contact isn't just an ending, it's a beginning. It's a chance to redefine your story, not through fear or regret, but through courage, introspection, and hope. Because in the silence, in the reflection, and in the choices we make, we find not only what we've been searching for, but also who we were meant to be. Thank you.